With this historical and literary background in mind, let us turn our attention to the distinctive features of this story itself. Here is the beginning of the story in the new NRSV UE translation. When God began to create the heavens and the earth was complete chaos, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. You may be familiar with certain other translations of the Bible that render the initial phrase here as a separate sentence. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, period. However, I prefer the interpretation of this phrase as a temporal clause, when God began to create, because it better fits the literary pattern of ancient creation accounts that we have seen, especially those from Mesopotamia. Just as the Atrahasis epic begins when gods like men, and Enuma Elish begins when the heavens above had not been named, so the 7-day creation story begins when God began to create. This understanding also makes better sense of the grammar of the Hebrew original, in my view. In any case, the tenor of the text from the very beginning is consonant with what we know of other ancient creation accounts. The allusions to Mesopotamian creation stories don't end there. Note the mention of the heavens and the earth in the first line, which is of course a common way across the ancient world of referring to everything that exists, the universe. This pair is also invoked in the first 2 lines of Enuma Elish, when the heavens above had not been named, nor the earth beneath been called by name. Moreover, just as Enuma Elish imagines an initial state of chaos represented by roiling waters, so the 7-day Genesis creation also mentions a complete chaos, Hebrew tohu vavohu, as well as darkness covering the face of the deep, and waters. Indeed, the word translated deep is the Hebrew term tehom, which is etymologically related to the Akkadian term Tiamat, as the name of the primordial saltwater goddess of Enuma Elish, an observation that's possible because both Hebrew and Akkadian belong to the Semitic language family. The point here isn't that the 2 stories are identical, because they certainly represent different accounts of how creation takes place, but that they share a common background, a joint conceptual vocabulary for talking about creation. They make use of the same symbols and shared patterns of how creation is understood, but tell distinct stories with those symbols. What is particularly distinct about this Israelite 7-day creation story is the role of a single God, Hebrew Elohim, who brings all things into existence. Instead of a gendered primordial pair like in Enuma Elish, in which the waters themselves have generating power, here we have a single deity that's present above the waters, which are relegated to the background and diminished in importance. In fact, it's details like these that led some interpreters to see the story as a subtle critique or correction of the official Babylonian creation account of Enuma Elish. It's as if the Israelite author is saying, no, the creation of heavens and the earth did not happen the way the Babylonians understood it. It actually happened this way, with the Israelite God as the creator. The means by which Elohim creates, that is, by speaking things into existence, let there be light, is actually reminiscent of ancient Egyptian conceptions, particularly that of Ptah in the Memphite theology, as we mentioned in a previous lecture. But as a further distinction from both Egyptian and Mesopotamian conceptions, Elohim is not the parent of a series of other generations of gods. Elohim is the singular God, or at least the only supreme deity that is of relevance to creation. Everywhere in the story where there might be hints of another godlike being, such as the waters or the deep, Tehom, the sun, moon, and stars, which are viewed as deities in other ancient Near Eastern cultures, or the great creatures of the sea in verse 21, the importance of that being is diminished relative to the creator deity. I also mentioned that the Israelite priestly source is characterized by an emphasis on order in its presentation of things, and this text is a prime example of this. The progression of creation acts over the 7 days follows a very structured pattern in which days 1 through 3 and days 4 through 6 form two distinct groups. Days 1 through 3 involve acts of separation, that is, taking something that is relatively disordered and producing more order by distinguishing one part of it from another. So light is separated from darkness on day 1. The waters above are separated from the waters below on day 2. And the dry land is separated from the seas on day 3. Days 4 through 6, on the other hand, involve acts of filling, the creation of things to populate the ordered structures that have been established on days 1 through 3 in corresponding fashion. So, day 4 involves the creation of lights, the sun, the moon, the stars, in the sky, thus filling the structure provided on day 1. Day 5 involves the creation of sea creatures and birds, thus filling the waters above, the sky, and the waters below. And day 6 has the creation of all land animals, including humans, thus populating the dry land. Everything adheres to a perfectly symmetrical pattern. All this is capped off by the 7th day, when God rests, Hebrew Shabbat. This is the word from which the Jewish term Sabbath is derived. God rests from the work of creation not out of exhaustion, but as an expression of satisfied completion. The overall pattern of 3 plus 3 plus 1 makes the chapter resemble a textual representation of a well-built physical structure. Another notable feature of this creation story is the place of humans in the overall picture. We have noted in relation to the stories we examined previously how human beings don't typically have a particularly exalted role. In Enuma Elish, the creation of humans is a bit of an afterthought, and their exclusive purpose is to worship the gods. In Atrahasis, humans are integral to the story, but only because of their crucial role in taking over the manual labor of the lower gods, and subsequently it's their noise-making that prompts the plagues and then the flood. By contrast, the 7-day creation story puts humans at the center of it all, in an elevated position as the culmination of creation. The relevant passage is as follows: "Then God said, 'Let us make humans in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth.' So God created humans in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, 'Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth.'" First, the fact that the creation of humanity takes place as the final divine act on day 6 speaks to how humans serve as the pinnacle of creation, both in terms of status and responsibility. Note that humans are the only creatures in the entire story that are given a command to rule over the other animals. But there's an additional dimension of this that relates especially to the priestly background of the story. I hinted earlier that there's an implied analogy between the entirety of creation and a temple abode in the story. A number of details I've mentioned already support this idea, from the ordered 3 plus 3 plus 1 structure of the days, with days 1 through 3 balancing days 4 through 6, to the expression of satisfied completion and rest on the seventh day. But perhaps the clearest indication of this idea is the way that the creation of the human is described. In the passage, God says, "Let us make humans in our image, according to our likeness." The first person plural our might seem a bit puzzling on the surface, but this is best understood as the so-called plural of majesty, like the royal we used by kings and queens of England. But the key lies in the terms our image and our likeness, which in the first instance describes some fundamental resemblance between the appearance of the human being and that of God. In other words, the human being is a copy, a physical representation of God. Moreover, the term translated image is the Hebrew word tselem, which is commonly used also to designate an idol, a cult statue, that is, the physical representation of a god that one would find in an ancient temple. The implication here then is clear. The human being is the cult statue of God, of Elohim, in the temple that is the heavens and the earth. In a world when the Jerusalem temple no longer stood, when it seemed that Israel's God no longer had a house in which to be worshipped, this story offers a complete reorientation. The whole world is God's abode, and human beings are God's image, being the fullest representation of the divine presence in the world, a role usually reserved for kings in the ancient Near East. That also aligns with the responsibility of humans in the story to have dominion over the rest of the created order. One finds a similar idea articulated in another text from the Hebrew Bible from after the Babylonian exile. That is Isaiah 66, verse 1. "Thus says the Lord, heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. So what kind of house could you build for me? What sort of place for me to rest?" Notice here that the body of the Lord is imagined as filling the entire heavens and the earth, heaven being the throne chair, and the earth being the footstool. We find depictions of the throne and footstool fairly commonly in the iconography of Syria-Palestine in the late Bronze and Iron Ages to represent human kings roughly contemporaneous with the time period of the emergence of Israel and the early writing of the biblical texts. But here, that metaphor is extended to a God whose parameters are comparable to the very limits of the known world. And so because of this, no house that any human could build is adequate for him. Within biblical scholarship, this part of the book of Isaiah is widely recognized to have originated after the Babylonian exile, arguably after the composition of Genesis 1 itself. If so, then this text may in fact represent a poetic reflection on the notion articulated in the seven-day creation story, revealing the spread of this renewed conception of God among the literary elite that produced the Hebrew Bible. In sum, the 6 days of creation, with the acts of separation and of filling, represent the making of the heavens and the earth as the abode of God. In other words, we not only have a creation story, We also have a story about the building of a palace temple. While in stories like Enuma Elish, we have a building of a palace to culminate the achievement of creation. Here, the very creation is the palace and temple, the house of God. God creating the world in 6 days is, in itself, the establishment of a palace and temple for himself. Furthermore, it's human beings who function as the embodiment of the divine presence in this temple of heaven and earth, as the cultic image of God. Recognizing these and other literary features enables us to understand the special appeal of this text that helped to make it one of the most enduring visions of divine creation that we know of.